Amelia Darnell sat at her polished mahogany desk, the faint hum of her office's automated systems filling the silence. She had worked late into the evening, poring over the fine print of a contract that could redefine the future of her company. Her focus was unwavering. Until her phone buzzed. The text came from an anonymous number. She stared at the words, "You should be here. Something's not right." A vague unease settled in her chest, but she dismissed it at first. Rumors and threats were not unusual in her line of work. Success bred enemies. She went back to the document, trying to immerse herself in the labyrinth of clauses and subclauses. Yet, the message lingered in her mind like a splinter. Lucas had left for the company gala 2 hours earlier, looking impeccable in his black tie and tailored suit. He had kissed her lightly on the cheek, his lips cool and perfunctory. "Don't wait up," he'd said, his tone casual. That phrase, one she'd heard 100 times before, now seemed to carry a peculiar weight. And when she had walked at his house the night before, she felt a subtle change. Lucas, I'll get the water." Amelia prided herself on her instincts, honed over years of navigating treacherous waters in both business and life. It was this same intuition that had guided her through grueling boardroom battles and multi-million-dollar negotiations. Now, it screamed at her to act. She grabbed her coat and called her driver. "Metropolitan Heights," she instructed, her voice firm. As the sleek town car glided through the city streets, Amelia's mind raced. Lucas had always been charming, his affable nature a perfect complement to her intensity. He had a way of diffusing tension with a smile or a clever quip, a skill that had made him an excellent lawyer and, for a time, an equally compelling partner. But lately their connection had felt thin, stretched taut by unspoken words and the relentless demands of their careers. The Metropolitan Heights ballroom shimmered with opulence when she arrived, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilling out into the grand foyer. Amelia hesitated at the entrance, the weight of her decision to come crashing down on her. She was stepping into the lion's den uninvited, and she hated the vulnerability it implied. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped inside. The room was a kaleidoscope of sequined gowns and sharp tuxedos, the air thick with the mingled scents of perfume and champagne. It was her world, one she had meticulously constructed. Yet at that moment, she felt like an intruder. Her gaze scanned the crowd, searching for Lucas. It didn't take long to find him. He was on the dance floor, his hand resting on the small of Victoria Sharp's back. Victoria, her COO, her confidant, the woman she had trusted implicitly. The two of them swayed to the rhythm of a slow waltz, their smiles warm, intimate. It's the end of tonight. The sight was a knife to Amelia's chest. She froze, the tableau before her searing itself into her mind. The room seemed to fade, its chatter and music retreating into a muffled background noise. Her focus narrowed, the betrayal unfolding like a silent film. The man made me want to gag, and when I looked to Amelia, all I said was the words, "Amelia, it's high time you learned something new here. Ever since I've been here, I despise some of the boys, but your friends are sus." Amelia gestured for them to move on. The woman's tears staring upon the threshold, blowing away when the background noise. Lucas twirled Victoria, his laughter echoing faintly over the music. It was a laugh Amelia hadn't heard from him in years. Her body felt leaden, rooted to the spot as she watched the pair. Then, as if sensing her gaze, Lucas turned. His smile faltered. Their eyes met, and the color drained from his face. "Sorry," he said. "I had to save myself." St. Lucas smiled evenly, his eyes with what looked to be weapons. His hands rose, and that's the only thing Victoria could see for herself. The crowd seemed to part as Amelia moved forward, her steps deliberate, the sharp staccato of her heels slicing through the growing hush. The whispers started almost immediately, spreading like wildfire through the ballroom. By the time she reached the edge of the dance floor, all eyes were on her. She didn't speak. Instead, She reached for a champagne flute from a passing waiter. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as she raised the glass, as if to toast. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she flung the champagne into Lucas's face. A collective gasp rippled through the room, but Amelia didn't linger to witness the aftermath. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her face a mask of composed fury. The doors closed behind her with a heavy finality, shutting out the murmurs and the stares. Back in the car, Amelia's facade cracked. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her chest tightening as she fought against the tidal wave of emotions threatening to drown her. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak, they collided within her, each more overwhelming than the last. I ache. There are times when I don't feel like if I'm in control, like I feel like I'm just riding things out, because that's how I feel. By the time she reached her penthouse, the initial shock had begun to subside, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window, staring out at the city skyline. It was a view she had admired countless times, a symbol of her triumphs. Now, it felt hollow. Pulling out her laptop, Amelia began to dig. The message, the dance, the secrecy, it all pointed to something deeper. Victoria wasn't just her COO. She had access to the most sensitive parts of the company. And Lucas, with his expertise in legal loopholes and contracts, was perfectly positioned to exploit that trust. Amelia didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she was certain of one thing. The betrayal she had witnessed tonight was only the tip of the iceberg. Amelia sat in the cool, austere expanse of her penthouse office, the city's skyline sprawling out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The quiet hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, a stark contrast to the cacophony in her mind. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched beside her laptop, the cursor blinking like an impatient metronome. Amelia's one of the plague you work on. Amelia's fingertips gently traced the damp surface before stopping and touching a calm button. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Lucas's face, ashen with shock, flashed in her mind. His frozen expression was a perfect mirror of her own emotions when she had seen him with Victoria. The scene replayed in her mind over and over, each iteration carving a deeper wound in her composure. But Amelia was not one to wallow. She had always been pragmatic, a trait that had served her well in the ruthless world of tech. She realized not one to wallow on because it served her well in the past. She laughed. More than once before. Total riveting. She leaned forward, smiling when she reached her lips to his own. Now, that pragmatism would be her weapon. She took a breath and began. Pulling up her company's internal systems, she bypassed the usual security protocols, entering the administrative back door, a tool she had insisted on keeping for emergencies. This was such a moment. She started with Victoria's accounts, meticulously combing through emails, financial reports, and file access logs. Her suspicions hardened into grim certainty within hours. The amount to keep you helped keep her afloat, the largest amount she had ever spent on a single work. Her extended family members were probably baking a pie in the kitchen and said, "Gragglove, study my papers." Her counsel logs lasted. Sure, that took like 20 minutes, but her company's range was insignificant when it came to these things. She opened a substack of them and connected to the flash drive, which pressed download, finally putting a number into the font. Victoria's account had been unusually active over the past 3 months, accessing files unrelated to her scope of work, patent applications, proprietary algorithms, and investor pitch decks. Amelia cross-referenced this activity with timestamps on Lucas's personal calendar. The coincidences were too precise to be dismissed. Business lunches during her absences, late-night meetings, unexplained trips. It all pointed to collusion. With her hands, she paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Memories flickered in her mind like ghosts. Victoria had been a rising star in the company, someone Amelia had taken under her wing. There had been late nights over takeout, brainstorming sessions that stretched until dawn, and countless moments of camaraderie. Victoria had even been a bridesmaid at her wedding. How could she have missed the warning signs? Um, sorry. Uh, she said awkwardly, knowing she was going to hurt Victoria as she went on to share how grateful she was to her friend. She immediately felt better about trying to believe her eyes as the woman fumbled in her pockets as if looking for something and could find it. Her phone buzzed, dragging her back to the present. It was Claire, her personal assistant, and the one person she trusted implicitly. You haven't slept, have you? Claire's voice was sharp with concern. I'll sleep when this is over, Amelia replied tersely. Don't burn out, we need you sharp. Amelia nodded, even though Claire couldn't see her. Keep this quiet, but I need a full background check on Victoria. Everything she's done in the past 5 years. Pull anything suspicious. It was unbelievable. Claire's exploration continued and she picked up what she needed to read. Claire didn't ask questions. She simply replied, on it, and hung up. Amelia returned to her digging. Hours turned into the next day as she unearthed a trail of duplicity. Offshore accounts tied to Lucas's law firm surfaced, their activity aligning suspiciously with Victoria's data breaches. Amelia knew her husband's work demanded a certain level of confidentiality, but the red flags were impossible to ignore. These accounts were being used to funnel money. What you were helping to politicize to raise money for a company had been in acquisition talks with. Stephanie studied his activity and reached out to him, offering to help him in his investigation. Her expression was dubious. Her thoughts drifted to Lucas. The man she had once admired for his charm and integrity now seemed a stranger. Their relationship had always been a balancing act, her relentless ambition matched by his effortless charisma. Yet, beneath their polished exterior, cracks had formed, growing wider with time. Had he been plotting this all along, or had circumstances pushed him into betrayal? You gotta put on the hat with the laces before you put it on, or you can't wear the hat. You're caught. Her gaze fell on a framed photo on her desk. It was from a simpler time taken on the day they closed on their first home. In the picture, Lucas held her close, his smile genuine. She resisted the urge to smash the frame against the wall. Instead, she focused on her next move. Amelia began drafting a strategy. She documented everything she found, compiling it into a dossier that painted a damning picture of conspiracy and corporate sabotage. The evidence was damning, but it was not yet complete. She needed direct confrontation to draw out the final pieces. The following day, she sent identical meeting requests to Lucas and Victoria. The subject line was simple but commanding. Urgent. Strategy meeting at HQ, 9 a.m. tomorrow. At precisely 9 a.m., Amelia sat in her glass-walled office, her power suit impeccable, her demeanor icy. Lucas arrived first, carrying his leather briefcase, his tie askew, an uncharacteristic lapse in his usually polished appearance. He greeted her with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. You want a muzz? He asked, guiding her into his office. Victoria walked in minutes later, a picture of poise, though her face betrayed a flicker of nervousness. She clutched a notebook to her chest like a shield. Her eyes had metal R's, and she wore her hair in a bun. Thank you both for coming, Amelia began, her voice razor sharp. She gestured for them to sit. Neither of them seemed eager to comply, but they did. Let's get straight to the point, Amelia continued, leaning forward. There's been a breach of trust within this company, within my life, and I have every reason to believe that the two of you are at the center of it. Lucas's face tightened, a mask of indignation slipping into place. Amelia, what are you talking about? Cash exclaimed. Unacceptable. Victoria looked down at her notebook, her knuckles white. Amelia opened the dossier, pulling out a stack of documents and sliding them across the desk. Emails, offshore account transactions, security footage. Shall I go on? Lucas grabbed the papers, his expression darkening as he scanned them. This is absurd. Where did you even get this? Does it matter? Amelia countered, her tone glacial. What matters is that it's real. Victoria broke first. Amelia, I, her voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Amelia's gaze snapped to her, a predator locking onto its prey. How far was it supposed to go, Victoria? Were you planning to sell the company piece by piece? Or was it just a side hustle to fund your escapades with my husband? Lucas slammed the papers down. This is ridiculous. You're grasping at straws. Amelia laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, the evidence is overwhelming. The room descended into a charged silence. Amelia leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle. I trusted you both, and you've shown me exactly what that trust is worth. Oh. I lifted my eyes and was actually pretty surprised by her thoughts. You really think? Oh, great. Victoria's facade crumbled. Lucas promised. Enough! Amelia's voice was a whip crack. She stood, towering over them both. You've betrayed me, my company, my legacy. But make no mistake, I'm not the one who's going to pay for it. And Don James's, the finality in her tone left no room for argument. Lucas and Victoria sat in stunned silence as Amelia gathered the dossier. This meeting is over. My lawyers will be in touch. Between the Lord Shakespeare, Mr. and Mrs. and Major, they sorted through the documents. The sun had barely risen when Amelia strode into her office the next day, her mind already set on war. The confrontation with Lucas and Victoria had gone as expected, half denials, half confessions, and complete confirmation of their guilt. But that was just the opening salvo. Now came the harder part, dismantling their schemes and ensuring they couldn't recover. No, the city below her was a maze of glass and steel, cold and indifferent, much like her mood. Amelia's assistant, Claire, met her at the elevator, a stack of folders in hand. They've started responding, Claire said, keeping pace as Amelia walked. Victoria's resignation email came through at 3 a.m. Lucas hasn't made a move yet, but his firm just retained a crisis management consultant. So, what? Another what? Interrupted Claire, and justice for and death. Good, Amelia said briskly, pushing open the door to her corner office. The harder they fight, the more they'll lose.
Claire hesitated. There's one more thing. The board is demanding a meeting. Today. I'm leaving. Claire smiled. Claire paused for a moment.
Amelia stopped, her hand still on the doorframe. The board. Of course they would demand answers. The scandal was already spreading. Whispers of impropriety and betrayal had begun filtering through the corporate grapevine. If she didn't act decisively, the company she had built from nothing could slip through her fingers. If they spread she wanted to retire, she had to go now. If there was any saying in the matter, she had to at least put on her car wash and hit play. Schedule it for 1 p.m., Amelia said. And make sure our legal team is present. Claire nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. Amelia, you've hardly slept. Maybe you should take a... I don't have time to rest, Claire, Amelia cut in, not unkindly. Not until this is over. And once alone, Amelia sat at her desk and opened the dossier again. It wasn't just evidence of Lucas and Victoria's betrayal. It was a map of the damage they had inflicted. Rival firms now had their hands on confidential information. Patents Amelia had poured her soul into were at risk of being invalidated. The financial repercussions alone were staggering. If I'm not mistaken, I say, a pen pats the dossier onto her work desk. I saw my logo on it, her mom says, but there was one glimmer of hope. Among the mess, Amelia had identified the linchpin of their operation, a key investor who had been quietly funding Victoria's offshore accounts. A single thread, if pulled correctly, could unravel everything. Unfortunately, I sent my friends the link to Victoria's account and convinced them to pull their money. And after a few months of very loyal bass playing in the much smaller high school, Victoria made the move. Amelia picked up her phone and dialed. The boardroom was silent as Amelia entered, her presence commanding as always. The table was filled with familiar faces, executives she had mentored, allies she had cultivated, and a few skeptics who had always questioned her decisions. At the head of the table sat Julian Hawthorne, the board's chairman, his silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. Amelia, Julian said, his tone neutral. We need to discuss the situation. I'm well aware, Amelia replied, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table, and I'm here to address it. She spoke with precision, detailing the extent of Lucas and Victoria's actions. She didn't shy away from the personal aspect, acknowledging her connection to Lucas, but she kept the focus on the business implications. By the time she finished, the room was thick with tension. Do you have proof? Julian asked, his voice calm but probing. Amelia slid the dossier across the table. Everything is here, emails, financial records, even security footage, and I've already taken steps to mitigate the damage. She added,
One of the skeptics, a man named Gerald Price, leaned forward. You're asking us to trust you, Amelia, but trust has been shaken.
Amelia met his gaze without flinching. Trust isn't about perfection, Gerald. It's about how you respond when it's broken. I've built this company with my blood, sweat, and tears. If you think I'm going to let two traitors destroy it, you don't know me at all. Julian studied her for a long moment before nodding. We'll review the evidence. In the meantime, the board will issue a statement affirming our confidence in your leadership. Amelia exhaled silently, but she didn't let her relief show. This was just the first hurdle. That evening, Amelia returned to her penthouse. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window, her laptop open on the coffee table. On the screen were the beginnings of a press release. It was carefully worded, designed to address the scandal without revealing too much. But as she stared at the words, she felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her. The betrayal had taken its toll, not just on her company, but on her spirit. Lucas's face haunted her thoughts. Despite everything, part of her still couldn't reconcile the man she had loved with the one who had plotted against her. And her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Claire. There's been a development, Claire said. The investor we flagged. He's willing to meet, but on one condition. I nodded.
What condition? Amelia asked, her grip tightening on the phone.
He wants you to come alone. No legal team, no backup.
Amelia's first instinct was suspicion. It could be a trap, a way to corner her into making a mistake. But if there was a chance to cut off the rival firm's funding, it was a risk she had to take.
Set it up, Amelia said. The meeting took place in a dimly lit restaurant, the kind of place where deals were made in whispers. Amelia arrived early, her sharp black suit blending into the shadows. The investor, a portly man named Robert Tilling, arrived a few minutes later. He extended a hand, his smile oily. Is Darnell, he said. A pleasure. Amelia didn't smile. Let's get to the point. Over the next hour, they sparred verbally, each trying to gauge the other's intentions. Robert was evasive at first, but Amelia's persistence wore him down. Eventually, he admitted that he had been approached by Victoria and Lucas, who promised him access to her company's most lucrative projects in exchange for financial support. So what about you, Robert? They seemed desperate, Robert admitted, swirling his whiskey. But desperate people make mistakes. Amelia leaned forward, her voice cold. Then you'll want to make sure you're not tied to those mistakes when the hammer comes down. Robert hesitated, then nodded. You'll have my cooperation. Just keep my name out of it. By the time Amelia returned home, it was past midnight. The city was quiet, its frenetic energy finally at rest. Amelia, however, couldn't afford to rest yet. She had secured a critical victory, but the war was far from over. First of all, sitting at her desk, she drafted a letter to her legal team, outlining her next steps. Victoria would face criminal charges for corporate theft. Lucas, meanwhile, would be hit with a divorce filing that left no room for negotiation. All of it by November. But as she worked, her phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You've won the battle, Amelia, but the war isn't over." She stared at the screen, her resolve hardening. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop. And neither would she. Amelia woke to a hazy dawn, the city below her still shrouded in mist. The anonymous message from the night before lingered in her mind. "You've won the battle, but the war isn't over." The words were more than a threat. They were a challenge, a promise that her fight was far from finished. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was looming on the horizon. Okay, this passed me over. Her morning routine felt mechanical. Coffee, emails, reviewing her agenda. Each task was completed with the precision of someone trying to suppress the chaos swirling inside. Yet, the gnawing unease remained. For the first time in her meticulously planned life, Amelia felt as though she was navigating uncharted territory. She made her way, and Amelia prepared herself to deal with it all, when an unexpected event rendered her unprecedented. Claire arrived at the penthouse at 7 a.m., her sharp efficiency a welcome bomb. She placed a folder on the kitchen island and began updating Amelia on the day's priorities. "The board statement has been well received," she said. "Investors are stabilizing, though some remain cautious. And the press is running with your narratives, so that's a win." Amelia nodded, flipping through the folder. Inside were updates on the legal proceedings against Lucas and Victoria, along with financial reports showing the initial fallout from their betrayal. The numbers weren't as catastrophic as she had feared, but they still stung. A tangible reminder of how deeply they had cut into her empire. So, why didn't they go out when I told them to securitize? Jane said. "What about Victoria?" Amelia asked, her voice cold. "She's gone silent," Claire replied. "Her lawyer's trying to negotiate, but we've held firm. The police are ready to move on her if necessary." "And Lucas?" Claire hesitated. "His firm has been tight-lipped, but he's already filed a counterclaim in the divorce. He's gonna fight." Amelia closed the folder and exhaled sharply. Let him. By mid-morning, Amelia was back in her office, strategizing with her legal team. The room was filled with the quiet hum of voices, the rustle of papers, and the occasional ping of a phone. On the surface, everything seemed under control, but Amelia could feel the undercurrent of tension. Her lead counsel, Monica, laid out the latest developments. "We've secured an injunction to freeze the offshore accounts. That should block Lucas and Victoria from accessing any remaining funds." "Good," Amelia said. "What about the rival firm?" "They're on the defensive," Monica replied. "They've denied any involvement, but we've found enough evidence to link them to the leaked patents. A lawsuit is inevitable." Amelia nodded, her mind already moving to the next step. "Push forward. I want them buried," she said.
But even as she spoke, she couldn't ignore the shadow of the anonymous threats. She glanced at her phone, half expecting another message to appear. Nothing. The silence was almost worse than the words.
That afternoon, Amelia attended a media briefing to address the scandal. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras trained on her as she took the stage. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, she exuded confidence. But inside, her nerves were fraying. She gets on the stage and deals with everything. She began by outlining the actions she had taken to protect her company. She spoke of accountability, resilience, and the importance of trust. "Betrayal is a wound, but it is not a death sentence," she said, her voice steady. "It is an opportunity to rebuild, to strengthen, and to emerge more determined than ever." "I had never felt so alone," said Anne Sohari. "More than ever, because I have so much to learn."
The room erupted in applause, but Amelia barely heard it. Her focus was on a man standing near the back, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. He didn't clap. didn't move. He just stared. Something about him felt off, but when she blinked, he was gone. "Am I on blink?" she asked. A new plan registered in Lydia's mind. The meeting with Lydia. That evening, Amelia returned to her penthouse, the weight of the day pressing down on her. She poured a glass of wine and settled onto the couch, her laptop open in front of her. The anonymous threats still hung over her like a storm cloud, and she needed answers.
Using her company's cybersecurity team, she had traced the origin of the messages, but they led to dead ends. Burner phones, encrypted servers, layers of anonymity. Whoever was behind them was careful, methodical. It was infuriating. As she stared at the screen, a notification popped up. A new email, sent to her private account. The subject line was blank. Amelia hesitated before opening it. The message was short and chilling. "Do you really think this is over?" Attached was a photo, a grainy shot of her standing at the podium during the media briefing, the man in the hat barely visible in the corner. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. The next day, Amelia tightened her security. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into the threats and installed additional surveillance systems in her home and office. But the tension continued to build. Each step she took to protect herself only seemed to escalate the game. Her world began to shrink. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Only the most trusted members of her team were given access to sensitive information. Even Claire, her steadfast ally, noticed the change. "You're isolating yourself," Claire said one evening as they worked late. "You can't let them do this to you." Amelia looked up from her laptop, her eyes hard. "I don't have a choice. Until I know who's behind this, I can't trust anyone." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Just don't lose yourself in the process." A week later, the private investigator returned with a lead. "We traced the messages to an IP address linked to one of your competitors," he said. "But there's more. We found a connection to someone inside your company." Amelia's heart sank. Another betrayal. The investigator slid a file across the desk. Inside was a name she recognized. A junior analyst in the R&D department. Someone who had always flown under the radar. He had access to critical systems, but no one had ever suspected him of wrongdoing. Just sign him. We believe he's been feeding information to the rival firm," the investigator said. "And he's likely tied to the threats as well." Amelia felt a surge of anger, but also a grim sense of clarity. This was the missing piece of the puzzle, the link that connected everything. That night, as she sat in her penthouse, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had built her empire on trust, on the belief that people could be allies, partners, friends. But trust had become a weapon used against her, and she wasn't sure she could ever wield it again. The city lights twinkled outside, a stark contrast to the darkness she felt inside. But even in that darkness, there was a spark of determination. Amelia had survived the worst, and she would survive this too. Go to the worst, Banshee. Go to the best Abiones would let her, and I have good memories for you. Her phone buzzed, another message from the anonymous sender. "You're running out of time." Amelia set the phone down and poured another glass of wine. They were wrong. She wasn't running out of time. They were. This expanded section delves into Amelia's escalating challenges, the psychological strain of facing unknown enemies, and her determination to regain control. It also introduces new twists such as the mole within her company, setting the stage for the final confrontation. Amelia stood in the conference room of her company's headquarters, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. Below, the streets bustled with life, oblivious to the battles waging behind closed doors. The dossier in her hand was heavy, not in weight, but in what it represented. Every betrayal, every stolen secret, every calculated move against her had led to this moment. Behind her, the board of directors filed in, their murmurs of curiosity and concern filling the air. Julian Hawthorne, the chairman, gave her a nod as he took his seat at the head of the table. The tension was palpable, a coiled spring ready to snap. "Thank you all for coming," Amelia began, turning to face them. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with purpose. "Today, I'm going to lay out the full extent of the betrayal we've faced and what I've done to ensure it never happens again. Hey, she began her presentation with the evidence against Victoria and Lucas, sparing no detail: the offshore accounts, the stolen patents, the rival firm's involvement. It all unfolded like a courtroom drama. The board watched in stunned silence as Amelia methodically dismantled the narrative her enemies had tried to construct. But then she dropped the bombshell: the mole within their own ranks. The junior analyst in R&D, whose quiet demeanor had masked his treachery, had been feeding critical information to the rival firm for months. He thought he could outsmart us, Amelia said, her tone icy. But he underestimated my resolve. The board gasped as she revealed the final piece of evidence: a series of encrypted messages between the analyst and the anonymous sender who had been taunting her. The messages outlined their plans to destabilize the company, frame Amelia as negligent, and take control of her empire. What's been done about this? Julian asked, his voice tight. Amelia allowed herself a small, cold smile. The analyst has already been terminated, and as of this morning, the rival firm is under investigation for corporate espionage. Legal actions are in motion. The room erupted into a mix of questions and exclamations, but Julian raised a hand to quiet them. He looked at Amelia, his expression unreadable. You've done well, Amelia. Better than most could have in your position. Thank you, she replied, her voice softening. But this isn't just about me. It's about the company, about protecting what we've built. Julian nodded. You've earned our trust back. Later that evening, Amelia returned to her penthouse, the weight of the day finally catching up with her. She poured a glass of wine and sank into her favorite armchair, letting the silence envelop her. The city lights twinkled outside, a comforting reminder that life went on, no matter how chaotic her world had become. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Claire. We found something, Claire said without preamble, about the anonymous sender. Amelia sat up, her pulse quickening. Go on. Claire hesitated. The messages didn't originate from the rival firm. They were rerouted through multiple servers to throw us off, but we traced them back to a private address registered to Lucas. Amelia's blood ran cold. She had suspected Lucas was involved in the sabotage, but to be the mastermind? It was almost too much to comprehend. Almost. I don't understand. I don't pay attention. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Positive, Claire said. What do you want to do? Amelia's grip tightened on her glass. Leave it with me. The next day, Amelia took a detour on her way to the office. Lucas was staying at a boutique hotel downtown, one of the few luxuries he had managed to hold on to after she froze his accounts. She arrived unannounced, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors as she marched to his suite. Lucas opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. Amelia, what are you doing here? She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past him into the room. It was modest by their standards, a far cry from the life they had once shared. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. I know it was you, she said. Lucas blinked, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? The messages, she snapped, the threats, the sabotage. It all leads back to you. For a moment, Lucas said nothing. Then slowly, he smiled, a smug, infuriating smile that made Amelia's blood boil. You're good, I'll give you that, he said, leaning against the doorframe. But you're not as smart as you think. Amelia took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. You betrayed me. You betrayed this company. Did you really think you could win? Lucas's smile faltered, just slightly. It was never about winning, he said. It was about making you pay. You put everything ahead of me, Amelia. The company, the ambition, the control. I was just another piece of your empire. His words stung, but Amelia didn't let it show. So this was revenge? A temper tantrum because you couldn't handle being married to someone stronger than you? Yes, his mama replied, sliding her chair back. She peered at Amelia's freshly cut fingernails. Lucas's face darkened. Call it whatever you want. But you can't undo what's been done. Amelia's lips curved into a cold smile. Oh, Lucas, you have no idea what I can do, she said. Within days, Lucas's world began to unravel. The evidence Amelia had collected was handed over to the authorities, and he found himself facing charges for fraud, conspiracy, and cybercrime. His firm distanced themselves, their polished PR machine spinning a narrative of ignorance and regret. Lucas, once a respected attorney, was now a pariah. Victoria, meanwhile, had fled the city, her resignation serving as a futile attempt to escape accountability. But Amelia's lawyers were relentless, ensuring she wouldn't evade justice. As for Amelia, she focused on rebuilding. The scandal had shaken her company, but it hadn't broken it. Her decisive actions had restored investor confidence, and new opportunities began to emerge from the ashes of betrayal. Yet, despite her professional triumphs, Amelia couldn't ignore the scars left behind. Trust, once the foundation of her relationships, now felt like a distant memory. She had won the war, but at what cost? She expected to regain confidence, but she never ever did. On her first day of camp, a female pediatrician visited her practice. One evening, weeks after the dust had settled, Amelia found herself alone in her penthouse, staring out at the city. A new message appeared on her phone, this time from an unknown number. I underestimated you. She stared at the words for a long moment before deleting the message. Whoever it was, they no longer mattered. Amelia had proven that she was unbreakable. Raising her glass of wine to the city below, she whispered, "To new beginnings." And with that, Amelia Darnell, the woman who had built an empire and survived its near destruction, turned her gaze to the future, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next.